Dr. Richard Lawton, MD, initial case reports on SRI91 mutation, binder, 3rd, 1821. Something has been hidden in Sri Lanka following the year's annual northeastern monsoon. COVID-19 has hit its peak, and a tribal village deep in the rainforest has meant to change. We're on an expedition with National Geographic to locate the trapped specimens of new mutation of spider, known colloquially as fire spreaders by the local. They share stark similarities with and are considered to be a form of wandering spider. So far as we've studied, they are not stationary. They move through the forest by night and hide far up in the trees by day, where they nap and travel village to village, killing all mammals or reptiles in their paths, draining them of blood and consuming their remains. They're essentially a perilously deadly parasitic arachnid. The first night, we came upon a family of wild boars paralyzed and being eaten alive by enormous red spiders. Upon being illuminated by flashlights, rather than dispatching and running away as the nature of all known arachnids, instead travel in the direction of the light and fall into attack mode. They can spring from the hind legs and jump as high as 4 feet and as far as 11 in one attempt. They're chameleonic. A fur is dark velvet red in spring, fire orange in summer, or jet black in rainy cool months, making them incredibly difficult to identify. Their place and species of origin is currently unknown. While sleeping in Adirondacks last month, our team was awakened by high-pitched screams and wailing. A man, woman, and toddler had been attacked in the middle of the night. Before their inevitable deaths, they ran from their shack hysterical, whipping off their clothes and tearing at their flesh before jumping into the river. All 3 were pulled under by rapids. This was the first time anyone from the civilized world had witnessed the reaction to a bite from the species. It happened to one of our scientists as well, and his reaction was the same, screaming at the top of his lungs that he was on fire, burning to death from the inside. He perceived smoke pouring out of his lungs and mouth, and cried out that he could smell his flesh and melting. We restrained him just before his heart exploded. He projectile vomited several pints of blood before dying. We came back to the States with a few extremely agitated and aggressive specimens of the fire spreaders, and sent the team back to the jungle to set up ninja cameras and audio throughout for several hundred miles. And ever since, we've monitored the inhabitants from there. Each night, shrieks and cries could be heard echoing through the forest from either various different creatures or human beings in all directions. Spiders are not only carnivorous, but also cannibalistic. When placed in a cage together, they immediately began attacking one another. For the first time in history of arachnology, none survived. They tear each other limb from limb. We still understand their behavior, but the term being used in the scientific community for their thought processes is now of simply fury. One fascinating and simultaneously frightening result of the bite occurring just 3 months ago in a quarantined off village of COVID victim is not only shown to be a cure, but startling manifest. 3 men and 6 women were shown to have been bitten by the spiders. 2 of them had found under the streets of the hospital gurneys, and an alteration took place. All 9 bite victims had been shed of their COVID-19 symptoms within hours. That in itself would be a medical anomaly, but something else was. At first it was believed to be some form of psychosis or hallucination. They crawled around on their beds on all 4s, and began viciously attacking medical staff and other patients, biting and chewing at flesh. In less than 1 hour, the entire facility was overrun by those infected by the virus or venom mutation. Not only did they attack staff and patients, but mauled one another to death, consuming the remains. It must be stated that due to the untimely panic, Sri Lankan militants were sent out to eliminate all infected by way of gunfire escape. but many had disappeared into deep, cavernous caves. So far, those remaining have not been found or identified, but the CDC conducted its first case study this morning on an elderly woman, 72 years of age. She was strapped down and injected with 1 dose of the pathogen and a non-lethal dosage of venom. She instantaneously became psychotic, hissing at staff and snapping her jaws at the specialist. Her attention then became fixated on the floor in the corner of the room. She growled as she could see it moving. It was a pill book small and the tip of an infant's pinky finger, crawling along the wall more than 30 feet away. This woman was both colorblind and had suffered considerable nerve damage from glaucoma over the years, and was visually diagnosed to be legally blind. However, all of a sudden, she could see with 25 vision, the visual capability of sighting eagles, and continuously cried out as she smelled the scent of roses, and it was making her sick. Outside of the facility is a rose garden. Its proximity to the subject was 1,100 feet, separated by 14 walls and 2.5 feet of concrete. Her heart rate continued to rise from application until 22 minutes beyond, and once it reached a resting rate of 213 BPM, she would have administered 40 milligrams of alprazolam, 20 times the maximum dose allowed prescribed by doctor, before it began to slow. She fell into a deep sleep while she monitored her heart rate, still at resting weights of 155, and as the clinician began to undo her straps, the woman jumped on her and began chewing at her face and clawing at her eyes before 5 staff members were able to subdue her. The woman's injuries are critical, and she's currently in surgery. She lost an eye. Currently, the patient is in an induced coma and more unlikely to be able to pull back from it. This is because the pathogen and venom have binded with one another in her blood, and we have yet to figure out how to undo it, if possible at all. Confidential reports from the Sri Lankan government have come to our attention, and evidently the new mutation labelled SRI-91 has overrun an entire community, and it seems within days, clandestine evacuation processes will begin taking place. Dr. Richard Lawton, ND, Case Report 2 updates of SRI-91 mutation. 3rd 19 Toil. Update. Claire Cleary, RN, was taken up for surgery after attack by case study subject 1, induced with pathogen/venom binder SRI-91 at approximately 6:50 p.m. Patient undergoing ocular and facial reconstructive surgical procedure awoke 8 minutes into surgery and began attacking staff. Subject displayed accelerated strength and motor capability. One staff member dead, and 3 others in a critical condition. SRI-91 binder believed to be infected by all surviving attackers. Hospital currently in a lockdown. They'll say that would created here with the best intentions to learn and understand mutation. I cannot say the experiment failed, because technically it didn't. However, at least 2 infected with SRI-91 bind have escaped, and 1 possibly still in facility. I'm currently hiding in the basement morgue behind a locked steel door in complete darkness. I don't know what we've unleashed, but soon you'll all hear about it and we'll go face to face with this tragedy. We will see how civilization today utilizes vital fight response 80 plus years separated by the last global conflict. One thing is for certain, if the population would become largely infected and the virus continues to spread, at the very least, we can expect our own mutually assured destruction. Pray for containment. Raleigh City is one of the smallest towns in the United States. Home now to 11 people, this city has seen the most rapid decline of population than anywhere else in the US since 1900. Mostly attributed to the flood, the citizens living there know better. It's because of Magdalene Rose. In 1905, she was allegedly walking home from a doctor's house. Not because she needed medical treatment, but because of an affair. She began sleeping with the dastardly Hanson doctor in 1896, an affair which lasted 9 years, until her mysterious disappearance. Her husband, an affluent lawyer, was crushed when he found out the baby might not be his. Maggie admitted the truth to him and pledged to never see the doctor again, not even for treatment. It was around midnight. Her husband, suspicious that the affair was still ongoing, had told her he was to go on a business trip to finalize a plea agreement for a client, and they'd be gone from Monday to Wednesday. On the night in question, a terrible thunderstorm rolled in around the same time Mrs. Rose was walking through farmland and woods to get home. On this same night, another woman, named Violet Bellarosa, went missing as well. On May 5th, 1905, a farmer named Terence O'Shea, an Irish immigrant, had let out his Sheltie Sam to assemble the sheep. When the dog went missing, Mr. O'Shea locked the pens and went looking for him. The night previous, an alleged tornado had touched down on Maddie City. He didn't have to go far, however, because his dog came bursting out from behind a tree with something in its mouth. A severed hand, bearing a wedding ring, still dripping with fresh blood. A distraught and horrified O'Shea went to a call booth at the intersection of Valley and Wayne roads, and the sheriff eventually showed up to investigate. About a quarter of a mile from his back porch, the blood-soaked, long white dress was found lying across the top of the small hill, the centre point between Dr. Harrington's and Rose's house. But Michael was nowhere to be found. The dress would be recovered the next night. Mr. Rose had come back home the night he left, hoping to catch Maggie walking through the door late at night with her extramarital activities. But when she didn't, he marched to Dr. Harrington's house with a loaded shotgun, demanding to speak with him, or he'd shoot his door down. The doctor obliged, and they sat at his dinner table with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey, and he admitted everything. The doctor was found later that day seated in his dining room chair, with only his bottom jaw left on his head, while Mr. Rose simultaneously buried the weapon on the property of another farmer named Elliot, who died 6 months previous, and whose house and property were up for sale. When police raided Mr. Rose's home, they found a pistol and choir rifle, but not the weapon which would carry the type of bullets that blew the head off of Dr. Harrington. Rose explained that he knew about the affair and was waiting for his wife to come home. As a matter of fact, Mr. was called from the same booth that Terence O'Shea did not even an hour later to report his wife missing. That night, something occurred which shocked every resident across the state of Illinois. As the search party was preparing to disassemble, one man, named Tyler Murphy, let out a blood-chilling scream that could have been heard from one end of the town to the other. The others dropped their jaws in horror at the sight of it. Hanging by their necks, both dangling next to each other on the same branch of a 100-year-old sycamore, for both Maggie and husband Thomas Rose, swaying to and fro, each with a distinguishing sign hung around their necks by chains. Attached to the hanging chains were signs dangling from their chests. Thomas's sign read, "The husband's wrath," and around hers a sign reading, "A wife scorned," written in either red paint or blood. However, by the time they were found, all possible suspects had been murdered brutally or hanged. Though the evidence was lacking, most believed it to be the work of Thomas Rose, who murdered his wife and lover and then hung himself next to her. That is, until the severed hand was found at Dr. Harrington's home. It was an event shrouded in mystery, but startlingly, around that time, the population of the town was 706. As the years and decades passed, the numbers reduced rapidly to 11. That is, 3 families, each of whom moved in well after the horrific events of May 1905 occurred. Everyone else died, almost all under mysterious circumstances. Of the roughly 700 people who lived there around that time, 296 were found hanged in close proximity to the original sycamore tree. The legend became so great that eventually it was cut down, believed to be cursed. And so this is where my story comes into play, and I'll keep this as lean and succinct as possible. It's a story that is both harrowing and traumatizing to tell, but my therapist told me that writing down my thoughts would help with the depression. I have 2 daughters, Amelia and Adrian. My wife, Elena, and I divorced after I found out she was having an affair with our doctor, Henry Young. She had a baby out of wedlock, and upon finding out, I forced her out of the home and told her to go and move in with her lover. It was absolutely sickening and stomach-churning to be driving down the street past his practice and see him and my wife hugging and kissing each other outside of his business door. Deep down, I seethed with jealous rage. I thought we were soul mates, attached, but instead, we were married by deception and unrequited destruction of my entire being. She hardly even came to see her daughters, whom I'm raising to the best of my ability. I worked 2 jobs to support the 3 of us, while she lives the lap of luxury with this fucky homemaking charlatan. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed some time alone. I live on a beautiful piece of land handed down through generations of the O'Shea family. I bought it from Terence's great-granddaughter, fixed it up just the way Elena wanted it. A greenhouse built with my own bare hands, filled with gorgeous Jerusalem tulips, jasmine, roses, and carnations. And the other side, tomatoes, green peppers, onions, and cucumber. After that, I had a swimming pool built in ground with a diving board, since my wife used to be a collegiate level swimmer. Just threw it all away for that fucking guy. I took my girls to the neighbour's house for the night and went on a long walk to do some soul searching. And when I got to the top of a small hill, I sat and rested, taking in the rush of cool air on its way out as a brewing storm began to bubble in the evening sky. It was dark, and when the first streak of lightning flashed, I saw her. Not 50 yards from me was a figure sitting just the way I was, knees up to my chin, and arms wrapped around my legs. It wasn't until a gust of wind blinded me with a flowing white dress I noticed the figure approaching me. I can't explain why, but inside, I felt a morning dread the likes I've never experienced in my life. Even more so than when I saw the first sex between the doctor and my wife. However, this person was naked. I stood up and held the garment. "Yours?" I asked. In the darkness, it looked like a tall black with long, jagged limbs and glowing yellow eyes sunken into deep, dark sockets. However, the closest she got, I saw that it was merely a woman. A nude woman. Her hair was shoulder-length black, with deep, contoured cheekbones, pointed nose, supple breast, and skeleton, like ribs jutting out of her sides like a walking, mummified corpse. "I've been looking for that dress for ages," she murmured in a raspy, brittle voice, fully devoid of timbre or femininity. Like some sort of demon. She held out her arms, signaling me to pull the dress over her. I thought for a moment about lustful revenge. My wife wouldn't like her. I slipped the dress over her arms and dropped it around her body. Only then, between flashes of lightning, did I notice patterns of horrible, blue, varicose veins all over her, even in her face. Then she garbled something at me in some jagged, menacing tone. "Your husband who seeks vengeance?" As she spoke, she held out a hand, dripping blood from the wrist, and with a sharp fingernail, tapped the diamond ring around her finger. The pertinent question. "Do we know each other?" I asked. "Oh yes, for a century." The lightning crashed in tandem with a thunderous clap in the sky, when just for a brief second the demonic black entity appeared before me. Maybe I'm just seeing things. You're the woman they all talk about. Maggie Rose, I shouted. You shouldn't be alive. I began to tremble in terror as I gazed into her piercing black dilated pupils. The presence of pure evil stood at my feet. I killed my husband, and a fucking doctor of his. I blew his brains out. I was scorned by the two of them. They were lovers. Do you know the will it takes to cut off your own hand? His town is a breeding ground of sin and coveting loss. The bloodline of every family in this cursed town must be severed. Tonight, you must kill them all. She said one last thing to me before levitating and disappearing into the storm clouds. She ran her fingers up and down her blood-stained sleeve and torso and told me I killed them all while wearing the gown for my wedding day. A symbol, as for them both to see the way it should. But before she left, she offered me an ultimatum. Hang myself and keep the tradition going, or kill them all. What else did she tell you? Just one other thing. She said it was all planned out. She left her wedding dress covered in blood in a place where it could easily be found. That, in reality, she bore her husband's child, but killed it with a thorny tree branch while growing inside of her, and cursed the town under her feet. The entire story I've described was found in a letter on Rose's kitchen table, written by Maggie, but signed as her husband. Miss Warren, you've told this story to me many times, but you did it. It was your blood-stained shirt found at the crime scene on top of Robin Hill, splayed out next to your daughter's. Do you remember what you did? I see my wife tied weights around their ankles and hung them from that tree. And yet your wife walks free. Come on, Kevin. We've broken through this before. You need to admit it. Admit what you did, and then you can have catharsis and healing. Who is Violet Belowosha? A friend. More than a friend? A lover. His. Mine. And so she found out. The wife? She was going to leave. So, say it. You know what to say. I did it. Did what? I hung them. While they were still breathing. In the house. I made my wife watch, and then I slaughtered her with a pickaxe. Say it, Kevin. Just say it. I killed them all. I'm proud of you, Kevin. Now, write it down in your diary just below the story of Maggie. I need you to read it every day. And so, each day, Kevin Warren would awaken from his slumber, and just across from his bed, pinned to the wall, remained a piece of yellow paper tacked to the wall. Fit in large in red marker the words, "O husband scorned," crossed out, and written underneath, "I killed them all." As his lucidity began to break once again, Kevin gazed out of his window through iron bars, and just beyond the gates of the asylum, in a barren prairie, he looked on as his wife walked alongside her lover, hand in hand, and deep down, he began to bubble over with rage. And swinging on the porch swing were his daughters, smiling at him. The single tear drew from his eyes. He ripped the paper off the wall and tossed it in the trash. When I finally decided to get help for my addiction to opiate, I was placed in the mental health wing of a local. As I detoxed, I mostly ignored whomever my roommate was, and I went through several. One being I, right around my age, was severely addicted. He said he'd never see his wife, and I found out a week later that he died of an. I already was asleep when one night around 4 a.m. a new roommate walked. The bed next to you was empty. so I was already bracing. He was shown in by a nurse and left to his own devices. Because of the darkness, I could only tell that he was tall, thin, and alert. Previously old. It only took 20 minutes. I soon began to hear whispers, repeating the phrase, "I love you," non-stop, along with, "Yes, I can hear you." If I was half awake, then now I was wide awake. At 5 a.m., a nurse came in to take my thoughts and ask him questions, one being, "Do you have hallucinations?" "Yes." "What kind of things do you bugs, spiders?" I was finished. I moved out of that room, and the staff allowed me to lie on a dirty floor of what used to be a shower room. Interestingly enough, a shower room where a patient who was exponentially less worrisome, mentally ill person. It was filthy, but I didn't care. After several days, I had to go back to my room, as I needed to store a family. As I entered the room, the tall, wrinkly old man and said outright, seated on his bed, "I didn't try to steal your shit." I explained I didn't think he did. I came up with some other reason. I spoke to him for a while. He seemed okay. That is, until the first night, I watched you with one eye open. I don't know if you're a rapist or what. The next night, I had a nightmare that this guy was coming at me with a filled syringe, trying to stab and inject me, or pulling down his back. Throughout the rest of the day, he told me about being and how to survive. I never even asked about it. He just freely volunteered all this. He said his wife was dead, and his son just... He showed me pictures, but I got a feeling he naived them. For the next 3 days, I kept whining and couldn't sleep, also due to the withdrawal. He continued to talk, and but something he said really got to me. That last night he was in. He said in a whisper, "I can't." I never asked him what going back. For some odd reason, on that last day, he gave me advice. Is I ever end up in prison. He grabbed a comb, stood over me, and swiped it in front of me. Slashed them in the eyes with a comb. This way, they won't be able to see to fight back. He gritted his mouth, full of missing and rotting teeth, as he explained how he watched a man become blind. In the end, we parted ways amicably, him giving me his number, and me giving him a thing. Nothing too crazy occurred in this span of... However, there tends to be situations that are just fighting people. Something was going on in his head, and I don't know how long it might have been for this intrusive thoughts. The fact that rapist was in his mind the first night suggested some things I'd rather not acknowledge. This happened 7 years ago, which is why it's such a foggy memory. But there was one thing I do remember. The photo of his son was actually a photo of a guy who runs in a canyon. He's still alive. When I was 16 years old, I decided to surprise my parents with a bouquet of flowers for Valentine's Day. We've always celebrated this as a family holiday, rather than a romantic one. I didn't have a car to drive to a forest, but my high school was in more distant of a hospital boasting a gift shop that sells floral arrangements. Between classes, during the week of Valentine's Day, I set off for the hospital with my lonesome, cutting across campus to walk through a network of side roads, populated with specialty doctors' offices that keep odd hours. The sort of buildings where travelling doctors mainly hold surgery consultation, or perform small procedures a few times a month. Shit there passed without incident. As I was walking back through the deserted roads with a vase of flowers in tow, I noticed an unkept 1990s car close behind me. While my memory of this car is hazy, I'm left with the impression that there were at least two men within whose faces I could not see. Initially, I assumed the driver was simply afraid of hitting me, the reason they weren't passing by. So in a point of dramatically trudging further into the grassy shoulder of the road, demonstrating to them that they could safely drive ahead. But they still refused to pass me by, continuing to creep along behind at a slow pace. Beginning to suspect that the driver was more interested in me than a destination, I began to walk faster. The car confirmed my suspicions were matching my speed. Despite the impracticability of my shoes and the threat of spilling water from my bars, I started to run as fast as I possibly could. I hit the gas and again matched my speed. I realized at this point that the car was following me. There was no one in sight to notice, and I needed to get away. I bolted into the first parking I saw. The car turned in after me. Despite there being only 2 or 3 cars in the spacious front parking lot, and there being no other sign of activity in the office, the car did not stop to park in the numerous spaces available there. The driver instead opted to pursue me into the powerfully under construction back portion of this lot behind the office. It passed every available parking space to corner me against a pile of debris and rubble from the construction, coming to a diagonal stop less than 3 feet away. Before anyone could emerge from the vehicle, I somehow managed to scale the small prominence of rubble against my back, vase in hand, and jump from its peak to land painfully on the other side, which fortunately was a plot of undeveloped land within sight of my high school campus. I took a quick peek back over my shoulder to see if they were still in pursuit, but the car had sped off after I had reached the top of the rubble pile and was now nowhere in sight. They had not parked in the lot at all. They had no business there. The driver was following me. I sprinted at top speed and didn't stop until I was soaked with sweat in the dead of winter and panting in the student lounge among my classmates, who didn't seem to give a damn when I told them. Possibly because our hometown is supposedly a human trafficking capital, then the crime rate is outrageous. Although, I'm convinced that this was something more informal than human trafficking, as the dilapidated car suggested poverty. And I've read human trafficking usually arises through grooming and not who's snatched off the streets. In retrospect, I should have told an adult, alerted campus security, and called the non-emergency line of the local police station. But I was young, foolish, insecure, and afraid of getting in trouble for leaving campus when I didn't have a signed permission form permitting me to do so. I kept trying to convince myself I had misread the situation or was overreacting. I don't know what I even would have told the police had I called them, because I was entirely ignorant of the subject of the cars and couldn't have identified the make of it had I been asked. And I couldn't see the faces of the occupant. I was also worried that my parents would restrict my already extremely limited freedoms if they knew I'd been in any danger. I feel horrible for having never told anyone and earnestly hope that my secrecy hasn't led to someone being hurt or even killed. This is going to sound bizarre and made up, but I swear on my left nipple that this happened, and there are several witnesses. Even if I can't explain why, I'm fairly positive that this isn't anything paranormal. I live quite a distance off the road in an unremarkable house on private property. My neighbours are all older family members who go to bed extremely early, and whose children are already grown out and out of the house. In summary, there are no mischief makers to play pranks on. A few months ago, my mother and I stayed up late one evening watching television together. Around 3 a.m, I turned the television off and decided to go to bed. As I was leaving the room, I began to hear what sounded like carnival music playing outside of my house in the front yard. It was loud and close. My mother heard it too, and immediately went to the window to investigate. She couldn't see anything but darkness. Everyone else was either asleep in the night or away on vacation. The lights were off in all their houses, and none of them will be caught dead listening to anything but country music anyway. We were miles from the nearest, so it wasn't a product of noise. You could hear when a car was pulled up in the yard, but there was no sound of a car. The silence where we live is usually deafening. All you can hear is the ringing in your ears. Where did this song come from? Who was playing it, and why? I was very unsettled by the idea of a stranger in our yard playing carnival music, as such suggests malicious intent. My father and uncle later mentioned, 20 years ago, when our parents first moved in, the electrician had come to install the ceiling lights and stopped in the middle of his work, saying he could hear Pink Floyd playing in the front yard. Neither my father nor uncle could hear it. My father is a bit hard of hearing, and my uncle is much older, so they laughed it off. I thought the man was insane, but the electrician was really freaked out. He kept opening the door and trying to find the source of the noise, but to no avail. But it hit me. The song I heard that night was Pink Floyd's Circus Minor, the part that sounds like carnival music. I played the song for my mother. She'd been freaking out, saying, yes, and that's what I heard. Who the hell sits in my yard at night at 3 a.m. in the middle of nowhere playing the same song, which isn't even a popular song, 20 years later, with no car? Where did they come from? They would have had to have walked several miles to get there. Aside from this, the only other strange thing we experienced that would suggest an intruder, we feel and hear knocking on the living room window late at night around the same hour, sometimes so intense that the entire wall of the house rattles and it sends the couch against it into a reclining position. There are no nearby trees to track the glass, and no animal except a human could possibly reach it. Fortunately, it has stopped over the last few. I was 15. My family and I were in Fort Myers, Florida. There was a terrible storm in the horizon, riding in on black clouds. The waves had begun crashing like a watery bulldozer, and the sea was becoming choppy. I was boogie boarding and went out for one last wave. Something very cold bumped into my leg. Seconds later, I went under. In this moment, I was a boiled crab, getting my leg ripped off by a hungry restaurant pig, simultaneously screaming and inhaling copious amounts of salt water. I could feel something of great strength tugging me along in the sand as I clawed and began to fall away from my finger. Something tangible and icy is wrapped around my ankle. This is the moment I realized amidst the struggling that it wasn't a riptide. Something had a hold of my leg, and it was dragging me further and further from land. When I couldn't hold my breath any longer, I fight or flight kicked. Instead of swimming away from whatever it was, I swam along with it. My head broke above the surface one time as I projectile vomited salt and took one more deep inhale, and yet I was dragged down again. Now facing the horizon, I felt that same snug icy grip, only now my forearm, as it continued to pull. I'd assumed I was being pulled by a giant squid, but then I opened my eyes, and what I saw was nightmare. I was leering directly into the eyes of a little boy with dark blue lips, a pale bluish tint to his skin, and his jaw hanging open, like the corpse of a drowning victim. His bony fingers were latched to my forearms while gazing into my soul with dead, lifeless white eyes. This boy was miraculously swimming backwards while simultaneously pulling me to my death. Utterly frightening was the vision of his legs paddling eerily sluggish behind him, while swimming in the wrong direction. I pushed my feet against his chest and shot myself away and out of his grasp. The last thing I saw was the boy reaching for my legs while receding down to the black abyss, smiling at me with a toothless grin on the way down. I shuddered when I heard a humming of what sounded like some sort of demonic lullaby after he disappeared, emanating from all around me in echo. Once my head broke the surface and I began taking giant breaths, my eyes adjusted. I discovered that I was maybe only 100 yards from shore. I swam as hard and fast as I could, but fighting exhaustion, I figured I wouldn't make it. Until my feet touched down on the sandbar, the waves were violently crashing around me and thunder rumbling overhead. I took a minute to breathe. I told my parents what happened, that it was a boy, a very evil boy, who pulled me under. My dad says, sometimes in a stressful situation, you'll imagine things that weren't there. He never went against his conviction, that much. But I saw in his face the next morning, pure dread in his eyes, and I showed him freezer burns on my wrists and ankles in the shape of fingers. Somehow, I believe that many of those who have drowned from undertows were actually drowned by something else. They just aren't alive to tell us about it. When I was little, probably in 3rd grade, my parents let me sleep over in a friend's Dean house with another friend named Joey. Joey lived across the street. One day, when his parents weren't looking, he ran out of the street and tragically converged with a speeding pickup truck. Dean and I slept on his living room floor, and that night, we started talking to Joey. That's the where he's right now. If you can hear us, see us, if he was in pain. There was a loud crash in the kitchen. We were too frightened to go and look, so Dean turned on the TV for light. We could see his long-line telephone swinging by the cord of the kitchen, back and forth like a pendulum. So Liggett flung it off the wall. Maybe we should go upstairs, I said. Yeah. We dumped up, and as I turned to run, Dean grabbed my arm and shouted in a whisper, "Look!" He was pointing at the fireplace across the room, in the dark there. Though it was hard to see, it was clear that there were 2 legs standing inside of it, toes pointed in our direction. We poised for several seconds, through fight and shock. Joey? One of us asked out loud, but I couldn't remember whether it was him or me, who could have pretty much having an out-of-body experience. Suddenly Dean shut off the TV, and we ran upstairs, tripping all over ourselves. We went into Dean's room, shut the door, and both dove under his covers. I think we each almost had a heart attack when we heard his handle turn, and the door hinges squeak as it slowly cracks open. "It's here," we both whispered aloud. Just then, "You guys okay?" "Can't lock the door?" asked Dean. "Absolutely not," she said authoritatively. We didn't fall asleep until the sun came up. At one point, Dean's room smelled something awful, like rotten eggs. But it wasn't coloured from under the cupboard. It was coming from across the room, getting stronger. "Get out!" Dean screamed. His mum and dad both gave us a verbal thrashing at that moment, and said I was never allowed to sleep over again. Dean eventually moved a year or 2 later to another state. But after that night, I noticed that Dean would come to school tired often, and fall asleep at his desk, which was unlike him. I think the thought of not knowing exactly what was happening to Dean inside of that house made me more scared than if I had known. I hope he's okay now, wherever he is.